episode number 199. Andrew Brokos.
I got X-ray specs for eyes. I can see right through you.
Welcome to the Heads Up Poker Podcast. This is Steve Barton.
And this is Mike Snyderman.
And this week we have returning guest. He was on episode 121, Andrew Brokos. He's kind of a legend in the TPE community. Made some deep runs in WSOP Maine. Just been playing cards for, I think, about a decade and a half, making his living from playing cards. So real smart guy. Very, very, like, I think, I don't know what the word for it, Mikey, would be. Like maybe theory-based. Just real smart dude when it comes to cards. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, Steve, I was surprised he even showed up once for this.
Let alone twice, huh?
Yeah, Helmuth, some of these people, I guess you're just much more likable than I've noticed. But yeah, Andrew's great. Obviously, his videos on TPE are pretty remarkable.
I think they're some of the best.
Yeah, when I first joined TPE, it was like I like the hand histories. You know what I mean? I like kind of people bullshitting and having fun. And then I think the first video from him I watched, he's like, okay, I suggest you take out a paper and pencil. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Yep.
And of course, if you want to get better at poker, you have to listen to the man, obviously, right? So.
Yeah. He's another thing he does that I think is, I don't know if it's unique to him, but I kind of do the same thing whenever I'm teaching is I'll have the students kind of pause and think like, what would you really do in this scenario? You know, whether I'm teaching fire, you know, you have a garage fire, it's blowing out of this window, the main door is shut, so is the man door. What do you do? And he does the same thing with his videos. Is he'll say, okay, we're in this spot here. We have ace king, we flop top pair, and we're under the gun, so it's on us. You have two opponents behind you. Pause the video and run through in your mind what you would actually do. And by doing that and pausing it, it really gives you a lot more insight, because you often find that, or at least I do, I probably would have bet a different size or checked when I should have bet or bet when I should have checked. And then he runs through the next 4 or 5 minutes of explaining his reasoning behind it. It's a real effective way to learn, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
Steve, I should apologize ahead of time if I'm not entirely lucid today. I played poker till like 5:30 a.m. And then there's the trains roaring in the background, by the way. I live beautifully right near the beach, but there's also the train too. What was I going to say? Oh, I came home real late and I've had trouble sleeping, so I took some sleeping pills last night.
Oh, okay.
And I was going to the and I thought we were doing this on Thursday, so I apologize for being so disorganized, because I'm still kind of in a fog here.
In a fog here. How's your last couple weeks been played?
Pretty good. I had a pretty epic session last night at 2.5. I made 4,300.
Wow, nice.
Which is it's pretty hard to do at 2.5, you know, when you're buying for 800. But
yeah.
I just kept coolering the hell out of people, and you know that's a changer for the month in the level I play, for sure. But we'll see if we can keep it up.
Yeah, right on. Cool. I did your suggestion. Well, I actually downloaded it while we were recording the last podcast, but I started listening to the How Not to Die.
Yep.
Very interesting. Especially what he was saying about the smoke from cooking meat could be really bad for you. You know, they did
right. A lot of chefs have
on chefs that you know, had just been cooking for the last 40 years, and those that have been cooking primarily vegetables, and the ones that have been primarily cooking meat, and you know, in some cases they looked identical with cigarette smokers. It's like, wow, that I had no idea. You know, and they developed COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. You know, like, you know, chronic illnesses from just cooking meat all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the research seems convincing, first of all. I mean, there's a million diet books and whatever. Of course, this isn't really a diet book. This is about, but like, I remember the one stat that jumped out at me is like they did a research of like some rural area of China, and of 300,000 people there, only one of them had died from heart disease.
Yeah.
Where in the U.S. that number would be, astronomically higher.
Yeah, 45%.
And basically, yeah, these guys had nothing but like plants and nuts. They didn't eat meat.
Yeah.
And they didn't have access to the sugar and all that kind of stuff, sugar, McDonald's and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. It seemed like a life-changing thing for me, and but we'll see. But I've stuck with it. I still eat a lot, but like my cheating days are peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Okay.
But organic peanut butter and jelly. No synthetic sugar, however you want to put it. No animal fat.
Yeah.
So that's the difference, and we'll see if I can stick with it. But so far I've been I kind of cheat with salads. I like making the smoothies with the spinach. Okay. I should actually be. I need a little cauliflower and spinach, broccoli, and I should make some salads. But are you going to make any changes because of this? You think, or?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's funny that you said you cheated by putting in only spinach. I never thought I'd hear those words leave your mouth. Yeah, the Brazil nuts sound pretty interesting. Now, I'm only 10% of the way through the book. I think it's 17 hours long, and I've listened to 2 hours of it. But it's the Brazil nuts was pretty convincing to me that you can have a noticeable, testable difference by eating 4 Brazil nuts a month. And I'm like, okay, that takes zero effort. So
right.
I don't 1 pound bag of Brazil nuts that should last me about a year on Amazon. They should be here any day. So I could eat 1 Brazil nut a week. That's not difficult. As far as the meat, it really has made me stop and question. I haven't changed my diet yet, but it has made me stop and question. I wonder if this venison really is good for me or not. You know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, it's about as natural as you can get. They're just eating fruit and berries and grass. But I don't know how much of it is strictly meat or how much of it is because they feed cows corn now and, they're just pumping the cheapest way that they can feed the chicken they do. And you're essentially eating that, I guess, So I don't know. I like what Tim Ferriss said in the 4 Hour Body was he said that, perhaps it's not that it's the lack of meat in the diet that is making people live longer, but maybe it's the presence of, even though meat eaters eat more vegetables. So you're just eating 2 or 3 times as much vegetables as you would have. And that's really what's making the difference and not the absence of meat. I don't know. I mean, I'm excited about the book. I've been listening to it back and forth to work every day. And then whenever I got free time, and it's very, very interesting. I like it a lot.
Yeah, like I said, I have to, and then there's quite a lot of there's a whole website, I think, with him, which has, chat groups of people talking about recipes they use, that kind of thing too.
Okay.
I forget the name of it.
Do you put like a lot of mushrooms in there, something to give it kind of like a meaty substance, or not really?
No. When my mother was here, we made like a good pasta dish, which had, a bunch of vegetables, the onions, sliced mushrooms, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But I have not really done much cooking here. I kind of have an excuse. I'm playing poker 60 hours a week and taking care of a kid.
Yeah.
But the other thing was interesting in terms of you're saying easy with the Brazil. Although I have Brazil nuts every day, like a handful. I'm told that's bad.
Yeah, he said that was bad to eat too much because they're really high in some type of, I wanted to say element right now, like we're staring at the periodic table. They're really high in something, and eating too much of them. I remember him saying bad. I don't remember why, but I just.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I need
energy. I just note to self for a week. Done.
Right. I mean, this is not as simple as eat more vegetables and stay away from sugar and meat. There's some more. The other thing is, actually, I don't know if I got it from this book or something else I watched on the video, but some of these, you talk about easy, like some of these spices that are like supposedly have amazing like medicinal value.
Yeah, turmeric and curcumin.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've been also doing the chia seeds are really good. I forget what. So I've been throwing that in my smoothie.
Okay. Yeah. When I used to make smoothies, I'd throw the chia seeds in there too. It takes no effort. And you can buy 3 pounds of them, and it's good for a year. Super easy.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to try to stick with this. Like I think I said, really wanted my parents to do this, take care of themselves, and my mother said, "We'll do it if you do it." So me and mom have a little text exchange always about what we're eating, that sort of thing. So
nice. Right on. Well, should we bring in Andrew Brokos?
Please, Stevie.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with Andrew Brokos. Tired of bagling tournament after tournament? Start winning tournaments. Join me at Tournament Poker Edge and start playing like a professional. Watch the videos, post tough hands in the forum, and get a response from Andrew Brokos. It's free coaching from a pro who's been making a living playing poker for over a decade. Train your brain to make the right decisions automatically and start winning money. Tournament poker is one of the fastest evolving games there is. It's always changing. Bet sizing, donk betting, ace and king blockers, you have to stay on top of it if you want to win, and TPE is the answer. When you join, get the discount with the code HUP month, HUP quarter, or HUP year. Study and learn with me and other people that are just like you and me. TournamentPokerEdge.com. Well, Andrew, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It's good to talk to you guys. And hi, Mike. I've been corresponding some with Steve, but it's good to hear your voice.
Yes, nice to talk to you as well.
Yeah, it's about the same as nails on a chalkboard. I think he's being nice there, Mike.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, I was talking up quite a bit before you came on. I was talking up about your videos on TPE, and one of the things that I really like is that, and I haven't seen any other instructors do it yet, is how you do the thing where you pause the video and you run through in your mind of what you would do in this similar scenario, or if you're reviewing a hand history or whatever it is. And
you mean like encouraging viewers to do that, you mean?
Yeah, encouraging, yes.
Yeah.
That's the line that I've heard 100 times. I would encourage you to do that. Yes. Where did you get that? Did you take a teaching class and learn it, or what?
I didn't take a teaching class, but I have done a fair bit of work. So like even when I was in college, I worked for the Chicago public schools doing, I was heavily involved in debate when I was in high school and in college, in like competitive debate or forensics. And I worked with an organization that ran programs like that in high schools in Chicago public schools. And then I started a similar league in Boston when I graduated, and I ran that for a few years. So I was never like formally trained as a teacher, but I did a fair bit of teaching, like working directly with students, teaching them things. And I also worked a lot with teachers and knew a lot of teachers and like saw effective teachers in action. So I think I've picked up a fair bit of sort of the low-hanging fruit of what's considered like best practice among professional educators. And I mean, some of it also has been from corresponding with Carlos, so I know you guys know, but you're someone who used to be a teacher. And is now,
you just had him on your podcast, yes?
Yes, exactly. Just released an episode with him yesterday. So yeah, I mean, if in terms of people with a teaching background who are now poker players and good friends of mine, he's kind of reaffirmed some of that as well. But yeah, and some of it, I guess, is just my own viewing of videos. Like I know that I'm capable of checking out during videos, and sometimes I do. Like sometimes I give myself permission if it's just like something that I wouldn't watch otherwise. I might give myself permission to say like, well, it's better to watch this in the background and not watch it at all. But ideally, I want to, like, my personal goal for making videos is to make videos that can't be watched in the background, like videos that require active concentration, and ideally videos that can't be watched on like 2x speed, or you hear all these things that people do to kind of try to squeeze more content. And I guess I would rather create content that's just like dense enough that you don't need to listen to it at 2x speed.
Yeah. I've never been able to do that. I think I missed too much. You know, one thing I did start doing, I kind of got out of the habit, and then I started back up a couple months ago, is I'll start up a TPE video just before I go to sleep. I put it on my little iPad next to the bed, kind of propped up, and put the brightness all the way down as far as it'll go, so it's just kind of dim. And what I've noticed, I read this article, I can't recall where I read it from now, but they said that whatever your kind of last thoughts are just before you go to sleep, it will influence what you dream about. And if you can dream about whatever subject you're studying at the time, it will kind of enhance and speed up your learning. And so I started experimenting with that with TPE videos, and it actually works. I do dream about poker while I'm sleeping if I put on a video just as I'm about to go to sleep. So it have you done that before? Have you heard of this?
I have heard of it. To be honest, dreaming about poker doesn't sound that appealing.
Not on your top 10 list of things to do?
Yeah, I generally read fiction before I go to bed. Which even that, I think some people would question as a sleep strategy. But I think if you were solely concerned about the quality of your sleep, like it sounds like you've maybe chosen to prioritize quality of learning or quality of like information absorption over quality of sleep. Just from a quality of sleep perspective, I think giving yourself less to think about or like not having an active mind when you go to sleep, I think is likely best in that. Like if you just want sort of a sound night's rest, I think probably even reading fiction might be less ideal, but I would guess that like nonfiction or something where your brain is really actively trying to retain and process information is probably not that conducive to like ideal rest.
Interesting. You know, I've wondered about that because I think I probably am. I know that looking at screens before you go to sleep is bad. And so I have the setting on it so it turns off after about 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. But you're right, there could be some negative impacts of even that 20 minutes of having the screen up there. It could make my brain think that it's still light out for another hour or something.
Yeah, although I think those are kind of two separate effects. Like the screen thing, the speculation that I've heard on that anyway is that it kind of relates to like primal, people got themselves in the mood to sleep, like early humans got themselves in the mood to sleep with light from a fire. And so like the blue light of a screen is less conducive to sleep or like communicates the wrong thing to your brain than like a more warm red light.
That's why the night mode is kind of orange.
Yes, yeah. And but I said the thing of just like having stuff on your mind is more just like if your mind is active, I think many people, I don't know about you, but many people have a harder time getting to sleep if they're like ruminating on things. Or one of the things that keeps people up is just that their brain is like stuck on something and not ready to rest.
Huh. Okay.
That said, I have one of my favorite pictures of Carlos is from when he was visiting me in San Francisco, and he's sort of, in San Francisco, we don't have like a spare bedroom, so he was like in a sleeping bag on the floor. And,
I saw that. Visions of check racing in his head or something.
Exactly, yeah. He's like passed out with his iPad and TPU. So I mean, you're certainly not the only one who does it, but no, it's not for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask about the fiction? Steve and I, we always totally interested in different stuff. Is there any book recommendations you throw out there just from the last 6 or 12 months of reading? I'd be curious.
The one I'm reading right now, I think is fantastic. It's called The Goldfinch. Donna Tartt, I believe, is the author's name.
Okay,
it won the Pulitzer Prize a couple of years ago. And it had been recommended to me by a few people, and I remember like seeing it in bookstores and things. I don't know why I didn't read it sooner. I had a recollection that I had like read a description of what it was about, and it didn't sound that interesting to me. But now that I actually know what it's about, I don't know why I wouldn't have been interested in it sooner. And I think it's just fantastic. I mean, it's the plot wise, it's pretty interesting and like fast paced, which a lot of literary stuff is not always.
Sure.
Like, literature isn't always plot forward, and this is pretty plot facing, which I like. And it's also just very, very well written, just from the perspective of someone who writes and tries to get better at writing. I think there's a lot you can learn from that book as well. So I would recommend that one very highly.
Is there class? I know I've heard Nate mention David Foster Wallace as one of his favorite writers. I remember you
we're
reading
both big on him.
Okay. Is there any other writers you could
Well, I would have the caveat on Wallace. I do like Wallace's fiction. I like his nonfiction better, and I think it's a lot more accessible. So Wallace is an example of someone like Infinite Jest is not really a plot forward book. Infinite Jest is a very difficult book to follow, even at a literal level, to kind of a process like what's happening is quite difficult. Like when I got to the end of Infinite Jest, the end comes at a very surprising moment. Like it's not like all of a sudden the book is just like over. It doesn't feel like anything was resolved.
Yeah, his first novel I read actually ends in mid-sentence.
The Broom of the System?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was, obviously it's deliberate. I'm just
right. Yeah, but he's very his fiction is very avant-garde is probably like there's a lot of words he wouldn't want me to use to describe it, I think, but
sure.
It's challenging. Like it's especially Broom of the System, because that was something that he wrote as that started as his thesis, I believe, for his when he was getting his PhD. But it's very, he has some kind of like high-minded literary things in mind that are not what a lot of people, especially if you're not someone who reads a lot of literature, to think you're just going to like, oh, I'll just read Infinite Jest. Like, I think that is likely to turn a lot of people off to Wallace. I do think it's a great book. Like, that's not to dismiss it. But I think it's a hard starting point. The one I often point people towards for David Foster Wallace is there's both an essay and a collection of essays that have this title, A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again. And I think both the title essay is fantastic. It's about his experiences on a luxury cruise line, but it kind of gets into larger speculation about what we either as Americans or kind of as like modern people think of as luxury, and whether that's really luxurious or like why we're looking for those particular things, and also why he found it very kind of depressing and unsatisfying. So it's a very interesting essay, but it's also very, it was written for maybe Harper's or some like a more popular interest magazine. So it's much more accessible than his fiction. Like it's the sort of thing that anyone could just pick up and read and get a lot out of. And I think it's extraordinarily entertaining. It's very funny. It's insightful. It's deep. I just think it's great. And I think once I fell in love with Wallace through his nonfiction first, and then that gave me the motivation to stick with his very difficult to read fiction.
Right. What'd you think of his last novel? Like, I forget the name. I read like the first 40 pages.
The Pale King.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because it's not finished. So it's more like fragments. He committed suicide, and I think it was maybe his publisher in combination with his wife. I don't want to get the details wrong, but they sort of stitched this thing together from fragments that he'd been working on this big project. So like as a novel, it's not a novel. It's pieces of a novel. It doesn't really hold together as a singular thing. I do think it's very good. And there's a lot of like individual tidbits that are good, even if they don't necessarily come together that well as a whole. But it's sort of a meditation on, or the boredom is like the theme that he's taking with it, which is interesting. Just
at least a third of it is discussing tax codes.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it centers on the IRS. The sort of main character is named David Foster Wallace, although it's not. I don't think it's autobiographical. Like, I don't think he ever actually worked for the IRS, but it's written as though he did. It's sort of like a supposed memoir of this David Foster Wallace person who worked for the IRS, and it was an interesting starting point for thinking about boredom. But it gets at a lot of things that it was among his concerns in his nonfiction writing as well, which is sort of choices we make about what to pay attention to or why we choose to distract ourselves, which has only become more relevant. Like he died before smartphones, but the kind of constant presence of, actually it's relevant to Steve going to bed listening to poker videos as well. But just our sort of constantly distracting ourselves with things. There's sort of a question like, why do we feel the need to do that? Is these really the things we want to be putting our attention on? Why can't we just sit with ourselves? Or what would it take to do that? Why is that maybe an important thing to be able to do? I think all that stuff sort of at least gets hinted at in Pale King.
Yeah, I constantly have the need to feel like I need to be doing something. I guess that's obvious though now that I've verbalized it. If I feel like I'm doing something when I'm sleeping, and that's like getting better at times.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very prevalent attitude in the poker world, and there might even be something to it in terms of like, if you really want to be the very best at something, you probably do need to like eat, sleep, breathe that thing. But I don't know how many people, like I think most poker players, and certainly myself included, are not really aspiring to be the very best. And I think a lot of people will say that that's what they want. I mean, I have this conversation pretty much every time I start working with a new student. I'll ask them about their goals in poker, and a lot of times people will say to me, well, my goal is to be the best. I want to be the very best or something. And it's like, usually when I hear that, there's a few people where I really believe them when they say that. Like Mike Leah comes to mind, Ryan LaPlante comes to mind. There are a few people that I can think of who I think they're clearly very, very like driven and focused, and I believe they really do want to be the best at poker. Most people, when they say that, it sounds more to me like they just haven't really thought about what their goals are. And I think it's like there's other ways you can enjoy playing poker. You can even make money from poker without necessarily like aspiring to be the best. And I think there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes around the poker world that's just sort of shallow self-improvement. I don't know if alpha is quite the right word to describe it, but just this kind of like constantly be optimizing without really questioning why are you trying to optimize this particular thing.
Okay. Interesting.
That's actually kind of what I wanted to talk about, Steve. You can interrupt me at any time. Is just the coaching. I was going to say, pretty much question that right away. Like your first coaching session, how are you? Do you have them send you hands before you even start, so you can kind of get a sense of their level of play, or is it just kind of?
I actually have a diagnostic that I created for this purpose. I kind of initially I started it with the idea, and I do think it's actually best when it's a little more directed by the student. Like if people, and I do occasionally get this, or people come to me and they have a very specific idea of like, I want to work on these things here. These are my concerns, etc. So it's great when that happens. And I think it's very effective, but I found that a lot of people don't have that level, which is reasonable. Like that's part of what they're looking for from a coach is like, no, you need to tell me what I need to work on. I don't know what I need to work on.
Right.
So I think a lot of people were intimidated by that prospect of me saying like, well, just pick out a few spots that you find troubling, and I'll use that to start to get an idea of where you are. So I actually created a diagnostic, some of which is like kind of broader questions like, what are your goals in poker? How do you approach things now? There's some like bigger picture questions, but then there's also some breaking down a particular hand and decisions within that hand, and asking for people to flesh out why they're doing what they're doing. And it's a very normal it's just sort of like you raise ace king pre-flop and get an ace high flop, and then a flush draw comes in. Like it's not like a super complicated check raising the river for 3x pot sort of spot. It's meant to be a kind of run of the mill, just let's get a sense of how you're thinking through these like bread and butter decisions that come up all the time. And even if you're making the right decisions, what I'm really interested in is what's the reasoning behind it.
Right.
Which is
so what I was going to say, when in doubt, you go back to Poker 101 stuff, make sure they're at least thinking along this line.
Well, I don't even necessarily think of it as going back. I think it's more, there's a lot of things where people are doing, like I think what people really need is thought process. Right? A lot of people, when they're getting one-on-one coaching, I think that's the thing that I can provide on one-on-one coaching that people are going to have a harder time getting from just watching a video or something. So you can learn mechanical things. You can just look at a chart of which hand should you open from which position or stuff along those lines. But I think what happens is a lot of people are doing things mechanically and don't really know why they're doing them. Even like betting, so betting a flop when you flop top pair or something. Like a lot of people actually have trouble articulating what's the real reason to bet in that case, or what are the reasons to bet in that case. And even if they're doing the right thing, because they don't know why they're doing it, they have trouble adapting, for instance, to a different sort of opponent where maybe betting is not the right play, or even just in a different circumstance where if there's more players in the pot, or if you don't flop a pair, or if you're much more shallow, or just anytime you change any of those variables, people essentially aren't prepared to deal with spots that are not wrote for them, because all they have is a mechanical strategy. Because they don't know the why, they're not in a position to adapt to something new. So I try to help people understand, why is it the things you're already doing that work, why do they work, so that you can then apply those concepts in situations that are less familiar to you.
That's cool.
Have you ever had to tell a student, you sense that a student just could not be a winning player, or is unlikely to, I don't know, can someone be uncoachable? You'll hear that in sports quite a bit. This player is uncoachable. They just think they have the answer. They're not going to. I don't know. I'm just curious.
So that last thing you said of like thinking they have the answer, I think that's the central problem, is when people just aren't open to hearing that they're, I guess they're just not open to taking in new information.
Another opinion. Yeah.
I think I've been pretty fortunate, or maybe I don't know if it's just fortune, but especially now with my having done the podcast for so many years and having done videos and things, it's very rare that I get a person coming to me who doesn't have a pretty good sense of what they're going to get. Okay. And I think that those people are sort of filtering themselves out already. And like the coaching's not cheap. So I think most people, I mean, my experience has been people are generally coming in with an attitude of like openness. And to some degree, it's my job to break that down. Like obviously people have some understandable degree of reluctance to find fault with themselves or acknowledge that they're doing something wrong or could be doing something better. Like there's almost always some kind of like psychological hurdle where I feel like part of my job is to understand or to overcome people's psychological resistance to change. I guess I would also say I think people are sometimes looking for more than just getting better at poker when they hire a coach. I think some people want, it's partly entertainment value for some people, and some people want someone to talk to. So, I mean, I will try to at least give a heads up to someone and say like, hey, you're spending a lot of time talking during the session, and every time I try to explain something, you're like cutting me off and being very defensive. I won't necessarily be this blunt about it, but I'll try to flag that for people and say like, I think we're not making a lot of progress because you keep explaining why you did the thing you did rather than listening to why you should maybe do something different.
Please stop crying. I don't care about your mother. Let's go back to the
But ultimately, it's like, it's their money if that's how they, like, I try to like make them aware of the concern, but ultimately, like, I do think there are people where that's really what they want. And, if that's how they want to spend their time and money, I'm okay with that.
I think Assassinato said the same thing. He said at least 50% of coaching sessions are people just wanting to talk. So,
I wouldn't put it at 50%, but yeah, it's a factor for sure.
Yeah.
What's the most fun part for you? I don't know if you want the coaching, creating the content, the videos for Redship or TPE, or playing poker. I don't know.
I do think the mix is important. It is nice being able to, like, I can get burnt out on any of those things. So being able to go back and forth between them, and even to some degree having, like, with coaching, it's a little less flexible because I kind of have to do it when students want to do the coaching. So coaching is probably the part that feels most like work, right? That's the part where I'm accountable to someone other than myself. It's the part where I'm on someone else's schedule. But it's the thing that I spend the least amount of time doing, I think, relative, if you count like writing videos and writing or producing videos, and also like writing and other kind of instructional things that are like asynchronous. Like if you put all those in one bucket, I probably spend more time doing that than I do doing like one-on-one coaching via Skype. So, I mean, that's the part that feels the most like work. It's probably also the part that has the most potential to be rewarding, which is maybe not a coincidence. But, when you get a student that you really see them make a lot of progress, that's very rewarding to feel like you helped this person achieve a goal.
Yeah.
Do you have any, just quickly, because I'm thinking of doing this, I'm curious. I talked to one of your Redship guys, Greg Vale, who's like the OA specialist, I guess you'd say, because I kind of want to learn that game. Mm-hmm. And in Big O, do you have a lot of no limit guys who are trying to transition to the mixed games? The conventional wisdom is that's where all the money in the future is going to be.
Well, so first off, I would not be the person to talk to if you were trying to do something like that. I've occasionally had people ask me like, hey, do you think you could help me with PLO? And I mean, the answer is basically just no. Like,
it's honest.
And in terms of, whether that's where the money is in the future, Nate has I don't know if this is original to him, but he's where I got it from. This is with regard to PLO. PLO is the game of the future, and it always will be. Like, it's, I do think yeah, exactly. I do think there are some structural reasons why No Limit is as popular as it is. I do agree. Like, PLO is making some inroads. I think if you're interested in No Limit, it's a lot more fun for you than those other games, especially if you're not aspiring to play really high stakes. Like, I have been in situations where there wasn't a big No Limit game available, or at least I was going to have to play a No Limit PLO mix. So I feel like at some point you probably have to do, and like even more so if you're Phil Galfond or somebody, like I think you kind of do have to be able to play other games if you want to be able to play at your preferred stakes. But if you're trying to play like 2-5, I think 2-5 No Limit is going to be viable.
Right.
I mean, it's dangerous to say indefinitely, but like I'm not really predicting the demise of 2-5 limit.
So in the summer, when you if you're in Vegas and playing a fair amount of cash, it's going to be pretty much all No Limit Hold'em, unless there's some sort of weird can't get a table for a few hours kind of thing.
For me personally,
yeah,
I played a little bit of 5-card PLO over the summer. That's probably the game that I'm at least next most interested in getting good at. And I like PLO 8. I play the PLO 8 WSOP event. I mean, I do a little bit of that stuff either for fun or, like you said, if it's a function of waiting for a table. But yeah, in general, I'm pretty exclusively, like 99% of my serious poker play is No Limit.
Yeah, I play PLO about 3 times a year, and it's always because I accidentally registered a tournament that was PLO. It's never delivered.
That sounds like a leak that's worth plugging.
Yes. Why do I have 4 cards? Oh, damn it.
Finally, Andrew, have you ever got coaching?
I've not, no.
You've not. Okay.
Really? Wow.
I'm
surprised you're as good as you are without.
I have kind of questioned whether that is not a mistake. I think there's a fair chance it is. Like, I think if I could go back in time, it might make sense for me too, or maybe it would still make sense for me too. I don't know. But my concern is always, like, I'm very diligent, conscientious, whatever. Like, I have a pretty high degree of I don't know, like it's just investment, I guess, in my student success. Or like, it's something that I try to take pretty seriously. And I've had a fair number of people come to me, students who have had coaching from other people, including some people who are like much bigger names than I am in the poker world, who have kind of said this person just didn't seem that interested in the coaching element. It was sort of like everything was on me. It was just kind of like they just showed up and would give me some like passive feedback on hands that I put in front of them, but it just didn't feel like they were really trying all that hard. Like if I could like go back to 2008 and get coaching from 2018 Andrew, I would happily do that. I guess this is just like a trust issue on my part, because I don't mean to imply there's no other good coaches out there. It's more, but my concern is always like, oh, what if this person like is not taking it seriously? Or like I have trouble, and I guess this is more my hang up, but believing that other people are going to like put as much effort into it as I do.
Interesting. Huh.
So just quickly on the coaching thing, are you, is there ever like a hand, where you're like, kind of, you feel you're a little lost and you're like, I need to talk to someone about this? Or if you talk to someone, it's like, oh, this is a close spot, it's interesting, what would you have done?
It's more common that I would go to software for something like that.
Okay.
I definitely do have people that I might, email to run a hand past or to get their opinion on. That's almost always going to be for exploitive reasons. So I'm just sort of like, well, do you think it's reasonable to fold here? So especially like actually just on that podcast episode that we just discussed with Carlos, he and I talked about some spots from a relatively small stakes live tournament, like something that's closer to the stakes that he usually plays than the stakes that I usually play. And so it was kind of interesting to get his feedback, because I think he probably has a better sense of how to exploit those folks than I do. So I might be better equipped than he would be to say, like, here's what Pio would predict doing in this situation. But if I want to say, well, how much should I deviate from a Pio sort of recommendation given who I'm playing against, that's the kind of thing where I'd be interested in getting a different person's perspective. If it's more a matter of I'm in a spot and I'm kind of like, oh, I have no idea whether I should have like barreled the turn here, or what my range should look like when I bet the turn here, or how frequently I should be betting the turn, what kinds of hands I should be betting the turn with, I'm a lot more likely to do Pio Salver or Poker Snowy or something than to go to another human.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Your recent video on video series is four parts on. I thought it was really interesting. You took the book The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and you took captions out of it, a paragraph here and there, and then you kind of applied it to poker. I've read that book. It's and there's a lot of little golden nuggets like that I think you brought out perfectly for poker. The majority of it was kind of dry. I'm not sure if you found the same thing.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. But the way you did the video series was really, really cool. One part that I kind of want to expand on that you talked about was the physical and mental fitness. And you broke it down into a few bullet points. You put exercise, diet, sleep, meditation, basically strategies for coping with getting excited, stressful situations, and like that. Could you kind of run through those, maybe take a minute on each one, and just kind of what's your routine or your standard operating procedure for exercise, diet, sleep, meditation, and feeling stress?
I'm better about some of those things than others. I mean, part of my motivation for reading this book and the whole reason I was doing this in the first place, a few months before the World Series of Poker, I asked on Twitter, what are some non-poker books that people would recommend as kind of preparation? I guess I feel like I've been very focused on like poker details of like doing game theory or that sort of thing, like the kind of mechanics of playing poker, and not so much on like, I think there's probably more room for me to improve on the like soft skills around poker, like the kind of stuff that comes up in that Art of War series. So I got some recommendations. Like I think Thinking Fast and Slow is another really good example for this. The Art of Learning is one that comes up that you hear people mention a lot. And then the Art of War I thought could be interesting in that regard as well. So some of this is like aspirational for me. Okay, I'm not great about meditating. It's one of those things where like I kind of accept that it's true that I should do it, but I'm not yet at the point where I actually like make time for it regularly, even though a lot of people who I respect do it and recommend it. And I know that there's data on it, and I don't really know what the reason is, but for whatever reason, it's not something that I do that often. I do try to have some quiet time during a break, like especially in tournaments, you get like those 15-minute breaks every 2 hours or whatever. Like I'm not trying to spend that time finding another poker player and certainly not listening to their bad beat stories or telling them bad beat stories. But
you're not smoking a cigarette out in the parking lot, talking as fast as you can.
Yeah, and I'm not even really interested in talking hands for the most. Like if it's something that could affect, like I'm like, oh, this guy on my left is really giving me a hard time. He's 3-betting me constantly. Like, what do you think I should do about it? I mean, I guess I can imagine some scenarios where there's like something of kind of immediate strategic relevance that I want to talk over. But in general, I really want like a 15-minute break from poker. I don't want to be going over hands. I might have a book or something with me where I'm gonna like read, or I might call my girlfriend, or there's stuff like that, but sometimes I'll just kind of try to sit quietly. It's maybe not quite meditating in the most formal sense of the word, but I do try to have those actual like restful breaks. And same thing for a couple minutes before the start of play. Like I typically show up a little bit before the start of play and try to have a little bit of downtime. Like I don't like to just dive straight in, get out of the car, sprint to the poker room and sit down and start playing.
Yeah. You mentioned that in your preparation is get there early, be fresh. I can't remember the quote from Sun Tzu, but it was basically the guy that shows up to the battlefield first, he's going to be the most rested, and the guy that's late and running up there, he's already exhausted.
Yeah, actually, that comes up in The Wire as well. I don't know if you guys are fans of that, but that's some of Snoop's advice to Michael is I didn't always get there early or something along those lines.
Don't be late.
Yeah, and diet, I mean, that was really more, I have spent some time working on my diet, mostly just kind of trying to eat less carbs and pay attention to how much sugar I'm eating.
You're pretty thin, so what's your, and Mike's in a weight loss challenge here that he has, I think, $700 or $800 lying on, so what do you do? What do you eat?
The biggest thing for me actually, and this is advice that I gave to Carlos, is I feel like there's a few of them. MyFitnessPal is probably the most popular one, but these like meal tracker sorts of apps.
Okay.
The way that I tried to sell him on it was it's kind of like Poker Tracker for your body, where I just didn't have very basic data, and it is only very basic data, but I just like basic data about of the things that I ate, like how much sugar was I eating, how much fat was I eating, how many carbs was I eating. Like I just didn't have, or even what should the targets be. Like I just had no idea on any of that stuff. This is maybe like 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
And so when I started using MyFitnessPal, it enabled me to identify a couple of things that I was eating that were pretty, like they were really pushing me high on like the carbs or sugar counts, and that I wasn't enjoying that much. So like I have not cut carbs entirely from my diet. I've not cut sugar entirely from my diet. I haven't really made that many dramatic changes. It was mostly, honestly, the biggest things were like bread and milk, which are like either sources of significant amount of carbs or significant amount of sugar, and neither of which was I really enjoying all that much. Like to just eat like a peanut butter, like sometimes I would just eat like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich out of laziness. So I was just like, I don't feel like making anything else. I'll just eat peanut butter and jelly. Or I would have like granola and milk for breakfast, which is another one. Like granola, you sort of think would be healthy, but it's actually, like most granolas anyway, are very sugary, and the ones that I was eting were very sugary.
Yeah.
So just trying to find, like, identifying those things that were very high in terms of stuff that was not that good for me, and also that I wasn't enjoying that much. So like I still, on Twitter, I have my cookie level. Like I often bring cookies with me when I'm playing poker, and like we'll eat them at some point. So it's not that I'm anti-eating that kind of stuff. It's more that I look at it as an investment. And so it's like, well, what do I want? If I'm only going to eat so many like carbs and sugar in a day, do I really want to waste them on like 2 pieces of bread, or would I rather have cookies and cookies?
Yeah. For me, it's
hard to have discipline there. Just talking about Carlos, it's interesting. I mean, he has, he's coming here again. I know he's talking to you about that, Andrew. And every time he comes here, of course, I learn about what total discipline is in terms of bankroll management and studying poker. And then we watch some videos that are about being healthy, and I make some vegetarian chili and all this. And then Carlos leaves, and he comes back in 4 months, and he's put on 20 pounds. And he walks through the door with like 8 boxes of cookies and a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew. So that's a hard one. That's a hard one to deal with.
Yeah. It's discipline is definitely something that I still sort of struggle with. I just find like there were certain things that were low hanging fruit to cut, I guess is the way I would put it. And it was stuff that I just wasn't even enjoying that much. So just like finding other things. And I guess part of it was a willingness to spend money also. I was saying if I increase my grocery bill, my food expenses by $1,000 a year, A, I can afford to do that. And B, if that also means that I'm able to, and ultimately I've probably lost about 50 pounds in the last 5 years. Yeah. So like, I think if you just ask yourself, is it $1,000 a year to me to lose 10 pounds a year? I mean, for me, the answer was yes. And I mean, even from a straight EV perspective, like assuming that you have the upfront capital to do that, it probably is going to pay for itself just in terms of reduced like medical costs later in life, or that's my assumption anyway, let alone like however it makes you, if it makes you feel better or whatever. But yeah, so I mean, the discipline side of things is still tricky when there's stuff that I really want to eat. Like I definitely put on some weight around Christmas because there's a lot of like, cookies and other tasty treats around that I actually want. But I did find there was a lot of, it was pretty easy for me to cut some things that I was not even enjoying that much in the first place. And it was just sort of eating as a result of not knowing better.
Okay.
But I guess also finding attractive alternatives to those. So actually finding like stuff that I would be interested in eating for breakfast that I could do almost as easily as I could do granola and milk, but there would be a lot healthier than granola and milk.
What's your standard breakfast? What do you usually have?
Commonly now it would be maybe like either eggs with vegetables, and one way of making this easier, because I know like for a lot of people mornings are a time crunch, is you can like saute the vegetables in advance. So you could even make like 4 or 5 portions worth of sauteed vegetables, and then you just like do the eggs plus the vegetables. So you can do those. I've started doing a lot of protein shakes. And so that's a good way to kind of get, especially, I mean, I'm not, obviously I just mentioned eggs, like I'm not strictly vegan, but I eat or try to eat like a sort of plant-based diet. So the shakes with like a vegan protein powder is a useful one as well. It's like avocado and Wassa crackers, I think are good. They're not terribly high on carbs relative to the amount of sustenance that they provide. So those are probably my most common breakfast items.
Steve, I would selfishly like to get a little free coaching here and ask about a couple of hands. Can we?
Okay. Yeah. You know what? Can we go over the one from the listener, and then we'll dive into your hands?
Sure, if that's okay with Andrew, obviously.
Yeah, I got the one that you. There's one that you guys shared with me in Skype that I think was good to talk about.
Okay, cool. Good deal. All right. This one is from Marcus. Marcus, thank you for writing in. He's been on the show. He's been a long-time listener. Hi, Steve and Mike. I'm Marcus from Sweden, and I want to start with saying that I love your podcast. Been listening to everything from episode 95 to your latest, and I hope you make many more because it's just the highlight of my day when you release a new episode. Thank you, Marcus. That's very cool. It's the highlight of my day when I get letters like this. Anyway, I have a hand I want to ask your opinion about. It's a micro stake 5 NL, so the blind should be, I believe, 2 cent, 5 cent. 6 max zoom table. Okay, so the 6 max zooms are when you get a hand, and then if you, let's say you're in the cutoff and you're waiting for the action to get to you, and you're looking down at 7-2 offsuit, you can click the Fold Now button, and it will instantly take you to another table in a different position with a new hand, and you don't have to wait for the action to get to you. So it's a way to really quickly get through a hand. If you're playing regular cash, you might be able to see 50 hands an hour sitting at a cash game table. At these Zoom ones, you could probably see upwards of 200 hands an hour. So it's a quick way of doing that. So he's playing 5 NL, 2 cent, 5 cent, 6 max Zoom, and he has pocket aces in the big blind. Folds to the cutoff, and he min bets to 10. So he raises to 10. The button calls, and I guess the small blind must have folds, and he 3 bets to 45. So what do you guys think of his sizing right here off the bat? We get a min bet from the cutoff, call on the button, and then he goes to 45.
I like it a lot. This is the first thing that I wanted to flag. Sometimes people get aces and their immediate thought is, oh my God, I don't want everyone to fold. Whatever, I don't want everyone to fold. And so they'll make a really tiny 3-bet or even just flat call. And I think both of those are pretty significant mistakes. Like, I think what you really want with aces is to play a large pot pre-flop, which, you do need people not to fold for that to happen, but you also need to put money in the pot for that to happen. Like, if you just call here, you're not going to get a large pot pre-flop. And if you make a tiny 3-bet, you're probably not going to get a large pot pre-flop. And there's an outside chance someone's going to 4-bet you, which would be awesome. But in all likelihood, that's not going to happen. So I think people sort of put the cart before the horse when they say, well, I don't want my opponents to fold, so I just raised a small amount. Like, your actual objective is to make the pot larger, and having people not fold is only a step towards that final objective. So if you just focus on the not folding part and you don't focus on the making the pot larger part, then it ends up being kind of counterproductive. Like, I think a scenario where we just pop it to, say, 20 cents and then get 2 calls, it's not really a very favorable scenario. We're going to be out of position to 2 people. We're going to have kind of flagged ourselves as having a pretty strong hand, whether or not people put us on exactly aces. Like, we've 3-bet from the big blind. It's going to be sort of obvious what kind of hand we have, and there's going to be some flops that'll be obviously good for us and some that'll be obviously bad for us, and people will be capable of playing reasonably well. They're getting a good price to call and potentially either hit a hand or just get into a good bluffing scenario. Like, there are some flops that are bad for aces, and we don't want to make it too cheap for people to call and see those flops and put pressure on us when they get those flops. And we want to have a lower stack to pot ratio when we go to the flop. Like, pocket aces pre-flop is the nuts. Post-flop, it's usually nowhere near the nuts. And you don't want to have a stack to pot ratio of 20 when you're out of position with aces. Like, that's too much money to put in the pot with an overpair in most situations. Ideally, you'd have a stack to pot ratio that'd be like 3 or 4. You can't always make quite that large of a 3-bet, but because you do have to balance to, like, you don't want to make it too obvious to you, or you want to entice people to call. Like, you have to find the right balance between making the pot larger and not just blowing everyone out. But I do think the right balance is a lot closer to 45 cents than to, say, 20 cents.
Okay. I was thinking actually a little bit bigger. I was thinking closer.
Yeah, if anything, I would go bigger.
Okay. All right. Okay.
This probably is a pot size raise. I would guess you just hit the pot button here.
Hit the pot button, yeah. Okay. So we're in the big blind with pocket aces. cutoff, min raises to 10, button calls 10. We make it 45. Both players call. Okay, so we got a pot of 137. And the flop is 8, 9, 6, rainbow.
Bingo.
Not quite what we're looking for with pocket ace. What are you thinking here? You're out of position. Before I say what hero does, what's your line of thinking when we get a flop like this? You know, we can put this in the category of Jack 10-7, like that.
Am I talking over? Like, so am I supposed to be giving other people room to talk here also?
Usually Mike talks so much.
I don't really have too much to contribute. I want to hear Andrew, but this is the kind of spot, Steve, where against the best players in my casino, a lot of times I'm just check folding. Yeah. Because they have the range advantage, and I just don't want to. Against the casual players, I can bet a good size, and if they have me beat on the flop, they're almost always raising, so I can then go for more value than later streets.
Okay.
I don't know if that's sort of in the ballpark of reasonable, Andrew.
I'm certainly on the board with checking. So I think like a good analogy here, even though no one really wants to think in these terms, but I think getting a flop like this when you have aces is kind of similar to getting an ace-high board when you have pocket kings, which is you started with a really good hand, you got a relatively unfavorable flop. Right, so obviously my bingo comment was tongue-in-cheek. This is not the flop we were looking for when we have.
No, we got it.
No, I know you guys did, but I feel like I should throw a call back there.
Okay.
So you sort of have to recommend, or you have to reconcile yourself to this is like the strength of my hand has changed, right? And not because like you still have a pair of aces, so in some sense you still have the same hand you had pre-flop, but relatively speaking, like what your expected value was holding aces pre-flop and what your expected value is given that this is the flop are two very different things. And you just have to reconcile yourself to you are not going to make as much money on average with this hand as you anticipated when you first looked down and saw two aces. And I think a lot of people have trouble making that adjustment. They get excited when they see aces. They kind of immediately expect or feel entitled to win a big pot because they have aces. And they're very committed to making sure they win the pot when they have aces. Like people in particular, and then not only do people not like getting bluffed, but in particular, they don't like getting bluffed off of pocket aces. As Mike said, this is not a good flop, not just for aces, but for your 3-betting range in general.
Yeah.
I do think there are some reasons, like the existence of flops like this one might be a reason to 3-bet with some hands that you might not think of as typical 3-betting hands. Like it may be that you have really good implied odds on a flop like this when you 3-bet with, say, pocket nines, because people don't expect you to have nines here. But that's sort of a separate question. In general, it's not a particularly good range or flop for your range. You're going to be doing a lot of check folding on this flop. For instance, if you had ace king, I would not recommend betting the flop here. It's just too likely that one of these players is going to play back at you. I don't think it's going to be profitable to bet with ace king. So I think with ace king, you're certainly going to have to check and fold. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that it can be deceptive to check aces here also. And it's not deceptive in the sense of like, oh, we have a really monstrous hand and we're trapping people by checking. But it's deceptive in the sense that people aren't necessarily expecting you to be as strong as aces when you check. And there is incentive for people both to bluff after you check because they can get you off of a hand like ace king. And there's also incentive for people to value bet hands worse than aces when you check. Like if your opponent's just got one pair, they might try to bet it. And so the nice thing about check calling here, as opposed to betting, is that it disguises the strength of your hand in a little bit in a way that may give your opponents the perception that they don't need to bluff when they have, say, middle pair. Where if you bet, better players in particular might recognize there's a chance that middle pair is good, but I might actually, it might be more profitable for me to just turn it into a bluff and, either call and bluff later or, just raise right away. It's the kind of spot where if you bet, you're setting people up to put you in a tough spot. And they might not even realize that they need to put you in a tough spot if you start by checking and calling, because that may be how you would play some weaker hands as well. Like maybe you have 10-9 suited in your range and you're also going to check call that, which I would recommend. Like I just think in general, this is not a board where you should be driving the action. Just because you're the pre-flop 3-better doesn't automatically entitle you or mean that you should be the player driving the action on every flop. Generally, the player who's better equipped to bet a polarized range or to have nutty hands, like range advantage, I guess is the term Mike used. The player who's more likely to have nutty hands is generally the one who should be driving the action. And or the player with higher equity, which is often the same thing, but not always. Here, we are almost certainly not the player more likely to have stronger hands. We may not even have the equity advantage. So I think that we are not the player who wants to be inflating the pot. In general, our range is going to be playing smaller pots. Sometimes it's going to be check folding. I think with aces, it probably means check calling, but I can imagine some opponents where I would just check fold immediately, or some scenarios where I might check and then fold based on what happens behind me. Like if there's a particularly large bet that I interpret as value, or if the action goes like bet raise, I might just fold immediately. I wouldn't say that my plan would just be check and fold to anything.
Quickly, not to go back to the pre-flop, just thinking about your 3-betting range. You said you got to put pocket nines in there, especially when you're playing the lower levels. This can become very philosophical, but in terms of balance, is that I play a lot of 2-3 sometimes too with a 400 cap. And I'm like, well, I need to be balanced here, so I need ace-5 suited and 10-9 suited in my squeeze range. Is that even unnecessary? I don't know, balance in certain spots.
Yeah, I think
I know that's
balance is not. It's not an end in
we're
itself.
just in and out. Like, is balance really that important?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think the answer is it's not that important, but there are cases where it might be profitable. I mean, it kind of depends on what assumptions you're comfortable making about your opponents. If you look at a flop like this one and you believe, my opponents are not going to recognize that this is a kind of range favorable board for them where they should be getting pretty stubborn and be trying to run some pretty big bluffs to get me off of overpairs on a board like this one. If you think that your opponents are not going to do that kind of thing, then I would say you're not going to have the kind of implied odds. So like the reason to 3-bet 10-9 suited is not for balance, right? Balance is not an end in itself. The reason to 3-bet 10-9 suited is that it might be profitable to 3-bet 10-9 suited. It might be more profitable than calling. And one of the reasons it could be more profitable than calling could be that your opponents are going to interpret a 3-bet as very strong and fold quite often. It could be that they're going to look at a board like this one and be willing to put a lot of money in the pot because they think that you're going to be capped on a board like this one. And so ending up uncapped on a board like this one could, it wouldn't, so the reason wouldn't be to like punish them or deter them from bluffing. It would be to profit from the incentive that they have to bluff. If you think that they aren't going to do that, then you don't need to worry about it, or you wouldn't want to worry about it. Does that?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like I think I just I'm lazy, I don't study, so I'll watch a video and occasionally hear some pro use some expression, and then I'm like, oh, I'll just attach onto it. I think there was a spot like this.
Until proven otherwise.
I think there was a spot like this in a video I saw where the player's like, well, I need board coverage here. I need my opponent to think, well, I could potentially have smashed any flop. I don't know. So that was why I thought 10-9 suited here made sense, just so any sort of middling cards, don't necessarily have to put you on an overpair. But I guess against these sort of people, maybe you want them to put you on an overpair, so they bluff too much maybe, and you get paid with a 10-9 suit.
Yeah, I mean the thing about balance essentially is it comes down to how comfortable are you making assumptions about what your opponent is going to do. So that optimal in game theory optimal, it means optimal against an unknown opponent. Okay. So if you don't know what your opponent, if you're literally you're going to make zero assumption about how your opponent is going to play, then whatever if given a certain set of inputs, like you still have to make an assumption about his starting range, for instance. But if somehow you knew your opponent's pre-flop range perfectly, but you had no idea post-flop like what his leaks were going to be, then whatever output PioSolver gave you would be the highest possible expected value strategy. The times when that ceases to be the case is when you are willing to make assumptions about what your opponent is going to do. And it wouldn't have to be based on experience with this particular opponent. You might just be comfortable saying, people at this stake just don't check raise rivers very much. So I'm comfortable assuming my opponent is not going to check raise the river. And therefore, I'm not going to do things that PioSolver would recommend me doing. Like, so PioSolver might say you're indifferent between betting or checking with this hand on the river, because if your opponent does check raise the river, you're going to have to fold it. But if you're comfortable assuming your opponent's never going to check raise the river, then it's going to be correct for you to just bet 100% of the time, because your opponent's not going to do the thing that would punish you for betting. And therefore you can exploit him by making that bet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what did Marcus do here?
Okay, with pocket aces, under the gun to act with a flop of 9-8-6 rainbow into 137. He c-bets 100 and 137. Cutoff folds and button calls. So when the button calls here, what do you guys think his range is? Like a lot of maybe lone sevens, an 8, a 9, probably not a 6 unless it's 6-7, right? Probably
just to repeat what Andrew said. Obviously, we've already we don't like the bet. But yeah, and now the pot is going to be what if he calls 337? You said so. Yeah. It's almost like a 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio. But anyways, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So the move is checking. Okay. Yeah. Do you guys have any other thoughts on that before we go to the turn?
I don't
say one pair mostly, but yeah.
Yeah, I would expect a lot of people are want to raise here if they have stronger hands. It's the sort of board. So for one thing, it looks a lot like you have an overpair. So there's not a lot of incentive for them to slow play. Like you're not like pocket aces isn't really going to get any stronger than it already is. Yeah. So like just calling here when they have like a set or two pair really has more incentive to hurt their action than to help it. You know, there's a lot of ways that pocket aces could become weaker than it is now. Just as more cards come out, aces gets further and further from being the nuts. So aces is going to get weaker before it gets stronger. And if they can already beat aces, then their incentive is probably to start putting money into the pot now. Also, if they had very weak hands, their incentive would be either to fold or to raise as a bluff rather than to call. So I would expect that the call mostly represents medium strength hands. What exactly constitutes medium? You know, there's some wiggle room there. It could even include a few hands stronger than aces, like some people might choose not to raise bottom two pair or something. In general, I would expect stronger hands, especially vulnerable stronger hands like two pair or sets. I would expect to raise more so than call. And I would also not expect calls from very weak hands. So I think like getting raised here would be the worst case scenario. Getting folds here might actually be the best case scenario, which is part of why I don't love the bet, is that we're like folds are probably better than calls for us. Even if we expect to be ahead now, there's going to be a lot of turns where we're likely to lose the pot. Like that's part of the disincentive of betting. Is it's not just about like when you're playing with deeper stacks, which even here in a 3-bet pot, we still, we have to play later streets. It's not like a tournament where we can just, if we 3-bet, we're just going to be able to jam any flop because we're so shallow. So like once you have to play later streets, you have to factor in not just how good is my hand currently, but how am I likely to feel about my hand on later streets. And this is the sort of flop where you can look at it and say, even if there's a decent chance aces is good now, I can't just go straight to showdown. Like I'm going to have to play later streets, and there's going to be a lot of turns that are bad for me. So I would kind of look at check calling here as a little like drawing to a blank turn. Like, It's a weird way to think about aces, but I think on this board it's kind of a draw where you're like hoping to get a blank turn before you put too much money in the pot.
Running deuces, yeah. Okay. All right.
What was the turn, Stevie?
Okay. Marcus says I put button villain on a very wide range, lots of suited connectors and such, which hits this flop pretty damn good. Yes. Turn is a 10. So I check, and he bets 210 into 337. So 10, now any 7 makes a straight because now the board is 10, 9, 8, 6. What do you guys read into? We're checking when the turn hits, right?
Yeah, now I think is really the time to check and fold. I think, like I as I said on the flop, I was kind of thinking of this as drawing to a blank turn, and this is the furthest possible thing from a blank turn. This is like
from a blank.
Yeah. I don't think like when people hear check fold, I think they kind of assume that means losing the pot 100% of the time. I actually think it's not impossible that we win the pot, which is to say it might just go check, 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 check. That does happen. It's not going to happen often, but you might win the pot, 10 to 20% of the time in that sort of scenario where your opponent has something like king 8 and is just willing to check it down with you. Like that, it's not impossible. But you're probably going to lose this pot. And that's a combination of the risk that you're already behind and the risk that you get bluffed. Like this card is bad for you both in it makes so many hands stronger than yours, and also that it opens up bluffing opportunities that it doesn't take a genius to recognize. So even if you think that your opponents in general are not very good at spotting good bluffing opportunities, this is a pretty straightforwardly obvious one. And there's not really anything you can do about it. Like just because it's a good bluffing opportunity doesn't mean that you should just close your eyes and call down with aces. The reason it's a good bluffing opportunity is that it's also very plausible for your opponent to actually have a strong hand. And I think this is a case where the board is just developed for you in a very unfavorable way. And there's not a lot you can do about it other than just surrender your hand and kind of accept that whether or not you actually got outdrawn, you got outdrawn.
Yeah, okay. Villain bets 210 into 337. Marcus says, which to me feels too big for a 7. So I don't put him on the straight. My thinking is that he's probably flatted flop 2 pair, but I make the call even though I think I'm behind to evaluate the river. This sentence I actually underlined right here.
Yeah, that's a
I make the call even though I think I'm behind to evaluate the river. That basically means you think you're behind and you're drawing even though you know you got the worst of it.
Yeah, I mean, evaluating the river, I don't really know what that. I mean, I guess I have a sense of what he means by it, but I don't think it's anything good. Like your opponent is going to be better equipped to make good decisions on the river than you are. He's in position and he has a range that's polarized, or he has some combination of like very strong hands that he can value bet and very weak hands that he can bluff. You have a very, like, it's kind of obvious what your hand is when you're playing it this way. So evaluating the river is not, like, overall playing the river should be good for your opponent, not for you. Your opponent, not as a result of being a better player than you necessarily, just as a result of having this structural advantage of what his range looks like relative to yours, is going to be in a position to play the river better than you are. So, essentially what we have here is our hero is saying, I know I'm behind. I don't really have the right, I mean, he hasn't explicitly said this part, but I think it's true. He doesn't have the right odds to call. And there are times when it can be correct to call despite not having the immediate odds because you think that you're going to be able to play the next street better than your opponent. But here, I think the opposite is true. I think the opponent is going to have the advantage on the next street, which is why we just have to give up. We're not getting good immediate odds to continue, and we're not really anticipating profitable. Like, there's literally no good river for us. Even an ace, our hand is still not going to be all that strong. So, I mean, there's just nothing good can happen on the river.
Yeah. Okay. All right. River is another 10. So the final board is 10, 10, 9, 8, 6. Any 7 makes a straight. Possible.
I'm sorry. Can I say one other thing on the turn?
Yeah.
The bit about, this bet is too big to be a 7. I'm very skeptical of that logic. There's no intrinsic reason that has to be true. Like, it's perfectly fine. There are good reasons why a player might make a large bet with a 7. And given this is a Zoom game, I think it's unlikely that Marcus has a read specific on this villain that says this player doesn't make large bets when he has strong hands. I think a lot of people's inclination is to try to read a lot into an opponent's behavior when they don't actually have a justification for it. And this is why I think it is useful that people have at least this like kind of baseline understanding of game theory or balance or something like that, is that there's a lot of cases where people will tend to say, in a Zoom game, you don't need to worry about balance. You just make whatever you think the right play is. But a lot of times you don't know what the right play is. And so I think, like if you think you can exploit your opponent in a particular way, you should do that. But there are many cases where you aren't actually going to know how to exploit your opponent. And so having some baseline understanding. And so I think what happens instead, though, because people don't have that baseline understanding, they just grasp. And so they just kind of make wild guesses about what they think an opponent's behavior or bet size or something means. That's what it looks to me like is happening here, is he just sort of, and I think it's not a coincidence that this is a favorable assumption for him, that he's sort of like, I don't really want to lose the pot with aces, and I happen to find a justification for not folding aces. Like, I think it's not a coincidence that he's justifying what he probably wanted to do anyway, which was not fold.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that, because he narrowed it down pretty close to a flop 2 pair. Like, well, that's only a few combos right there. There's
that's a good point too. Just combinatorically, it's not very likely.
Yeah. Okay. River's another 10. So final board is 10-10, 9-8-6. So I'm pretty sure that he has a busted 2-pair. I think we kind of talked about that on the turn.
Probably is the best card in the deck for us. For some reason, if he had 2-pair, we might have just counterfeited him.
Yeah, I guess if there is going to be a roto-runner, that would, other than ace-ace or something, that would probably be it. And I'm ahead, so I'm pretty sure he has a busted 2-pair. And I'm ahead, so I donk shove 370 into 757, hoping to get a crying call. Okay, if somehow we found us ourselves on this river, we're checking again on the river, right? Or do we just shove this to try to get a call from like a 9?
Andrew already left the table and is meditating in the corner, so
We're like crying in the corner. Yeah.
Well, is this one of those spots where if he's gonna check call anyways, why not? Because the players are gonna be checking back 2 pairs and stuff. Why not just shove it? Because you're gonna pay him off with a straight anyways, and maybe you can get him to call with a few worse hands.
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point, is to say, what is it that we're actually choosing between here? So if we were to take check folding off the table, which I don't know that we are, but if we are taking check folding off the table, then we have to make a choice between, do we either check call or do we bet for value? And I think too often people try to make that decision just based on the absolute strength of their hand. And so they say like, well, I bet when I have strong hands and I check call when I have medium strength hands. And I don't think that's really the best way to make the decision. Or the choice between betting versus check calling is a choice of, am I going to try to squeeze value from bluff catches, or am I going to try to squeeze value from bluffs? Right? But if you try to induce bluff catches, you do that by betting. If you're trying to induce bluffs, you do that by checking. So it's a question of which do we think is more likely in this scenario. In theory, I think we're probably still supposed to check here because we just don't have that many 7s, and this hand is not really a great bluff catching hand. Like there's a decent chance we just end up being indifferent between calling or folding on the river if he were to bet. But I don't think he really has that much incentive to call if we bet the river. Like we can't really represent bluffs here. Like what incentive would he really have to, like, let's suppose that he's holding a hand like 9-6 where he does have like a busted 2-pair. What would he be hoping to beat when we shove the river? I think in theory, there's really no incentive for him to call with a hand worse than aces. That said, it may be the case that players in 5-cent games just call too much on the river and don't think in these terms that I'm describing right now. So exploitively, then this is why I'm less confident, giving an opinion, because these are not games that I play. Exploitively, there might be a case for betting and just counting on our opponent making a bad call, but I think it would rely, I don't think our opponent actually has any incentive to call here. We would be relying on him making a mistake by calling, whereas he would have incentive to bluff when we check. But he would also have incentive to value bet when we check. I don't know that check calling is profitable. It might just be that check folding is still the most profitable thing to do. I mean, we are still behind a hand like Jack 10 that might have peeled the flop and now made trips. There are other things that beat us besides a straight.
Yeah, Okay. He tanks for a long time. During this time, I'm thinking he might have the 7 after all and putting me on a full house. He ends up folding, and I have no idea if I made the right play against his 2-pair or if I accidentally made a full straight. What do you guys think? Okay.
Yeah, that was another red flag for me. That anytime you're not sure whether you wanted a call or a fold, you probably should not have bet. Especially on the river. Things are a little murkier on earlier streets. There's a lot of hands on earlier streets. I mean, actually, including when you 3-bet aces pre-flop, you benefit from both calls and folds, right? If you 3-bet aces pre-flop and your opponent calls with 10-9 suited, great, you're ahead. If your opponent folds 10-9 suited, okay, well, that's still a hand that had a 20 to 25% chance of beating you. So you still gain something when that hand folds. On the river, that's not really true. On the river, it's pretty much either you strictly want to call or you strictly want to fold. There's not a lot of scenarios where you're an exception might be when you're trying to bet someone off of a chop. You still have a preference for a fold, but you do, you don't lose money when they call. But there just aren't that many scenarios. In general, when you're betting the river, you either want to fold or you want to call, and you should know which one it is. And ideally, you even know what hand. Like, so if you are bluffing, you know what hand am I trying to bluff my opponent off of. If you're value betting, you know what hand am I hoping to get called by. If you're bluff catching, you know what hand am I hoping to de-bluffs with. And I do think we started from that point. Like Marcus said, I'm betting here because I expect to get called by a counterfeited two pair. I want to get called by a counterfeited two pair. So I think he was doing some of this work. But I think the fact that he later found himself wondering, like, well, maybe he'll also fold a better hand, that is a red flag to me that this bet didn't really make a lot of sense in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you for the hand, Marcus. That was interesting. Brought up some good discussion. I think we probably.
Marcus, well, do not listen to the podcast before you go to sleep because you'll be dreaming about Steve. Just that's the only thing I want to add.
It's not such a bad thing. You got one, Mikey?
Yeah, I got one from last night. I'm playing 2-5 mostly these days, which is a $800 buy-in. But me and the villain here are 2,000 effective. We had the straddle going. And I have pocket sevens in the small blind, and it folds to me. And I raised to $30.
Okay.
Sorry. So what was the action before it got to you, Mike?
It folded to me.
Okay, so you just opened for 30 from the small blind?
Yes.
Okay.
Here's kind of the question about, I don't know if metagames, the guy in the big blind, who's the villain here, is the best player at the casino. He goes to LA and plays 1025 a lot, but he lives 5 minutes from the casino, and sometimes he just comes in there, you know what I mean, a couple days a week. So I try to avoid him for the most part. Plus, the table's weak. There's one other pro other than the villain here, and there's a few guys with, $1,500, 300 big blinds plus who are on my right. I think I already know the answer to this question, but I'm confused. Against this player from the small blind, I'm probably only even opening like 15% at the most hands. I'm just trying to avoid and not give him any money. But pocket sevens is obviously an open, and he 3-bets to $100.
It might just be a fold.
Okay. I should add.
I don't love opening to 30, by the way. I think I think probably that's related to your trying to avoid him, is just sort of wanting to like make a big raise and just like charge him a really high price to play against you in the first place. Is that?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know. In the straddle, my normal open is to 40.
Oh, okay. I missed that it was straddled. I was thinking it was just 2-5 and you opened to 30.
No, yeah, it was straddle, and usually if I'm in the button, I open to 40.
Okay.
But here in the small blind, it's smaller. I guess when we're deep, I can better defend against a 3-bet. I guess was my thinking. Although I should probably have the same raise size in every spot, I would think.
I don't know if that's important. I mean, I think you shouldn't vary based on your hand. Varying based on your position is fine. Like, that's public information. Everyone can see what position you're in, so you're not really giving away any information by changing that. In terms of whether or not you'd be better off, I'm not really sure, and I doubt it matters that much whether you're making it 30 or 40 here. I don't think it's worth nitpicking over that. I was thinking you would just open from 5 to 30, and that seemed a little excessive to me. I think 30 or 40 would both be reasonable here.
Okay. What was I going to say? It's funny that even opening only 15%, he's still probably 3-betting 20% plus of the time here, by the way. I should point that out. That was part of my thinking. It's funny, I've talked about a lot of hands when Carlos is here, and this is the only player, the villain here, that he's got any respect for, because he's there just to smash everyone else in the mouth. The rest of us pros are just kind of avoiding each other and trying to take the dead money to some extent.
Wait, why do you think he's 3-betting so much? If you're like, do you think he doesn't realize how tight you're opening?
I think he knows my mentality here. We're friends, first of all. He knows probably that I'm kind of short-rolled for this game. I mean, I've probably given a lot of life information that is bad.
This is one of those friends like these situations.
Yeah, everybody's always getting hustled. I'm smart. I've gotten better at poker, at least. Right? He knows that I know that playing out of position against him is like the one thing I should avoid.
Have we had this villain on the podcast, Mike?
No.
Okay, all right.
We discussed many of hands. Discussed many hands with him. This is the guy, Steve. I took my wad of money and threw it at him. So, but we've become
okay. Got a talking in code here, depending on our listenership.
I do call. I kind of like the fold.
I mean, if you really believe that he's 3-betting 20%, you probably just want to 4-bet him every single time.
Okay. But he defends his range. He flats every time, too, when we're that deep.
Okay, but I mean, 15% is better than 20%. So if he's never folding, like, you're pushing an advantage in that case. Like,
Okay.
I mean, I guess what I'm really doing is questioning the assumption that he's actually 3-betting that much. But if you really believe that he's 3-betting 20%, then you want to have a very aggressive 4-betting strategy.
So yeah, 20% is high. He's definitely got a decent amount of 3-bet bluffs, I guess I'll just say that.
Yeah, even so the problem with sevens is it's just they're not doing that well. Like a lot of his 3-bets are going to be hands that have good equity against sevens. And then like overall, I don't think you really have much of an equity advantage against his 3-betting range, and your equity realization is going to be very poor, right? Because you're out of position and because his range is like varied enough that it's not like you're just going to be able to set mine and count on winning some huge pot if you flop a set. Like your hand is going to be very difficult to play when you don't flop a set. There's basically no good boards for you.
Right.
And then even when you do flop a set, it's not like you can really count on winning some massive pot even when that happens. I think it's too hard.
Definitely probably call here with Queen 10 suited, right?
Yeah, I'd be a lot more inclined to play that hand than to play pocket sevens. I mean, it's like I probably wouldn't even fold eights. So I mean, I do think sevens is close. I just think especially if you are you think this player is like particularly good or something, I think just erring on the side of getting out of the way when it's close is fine and probably better for your sanity.
Right. But I do call, and the flop is 10-6-6 rainbow.
And what?
My first instinct is that I have the best hands 75% of the time here.
Some reasonable assumption.
210, right?
Yes.
Okay. Would you lead out here for like half pot, Andrew? Or
I don't think there's any case for leading. I mean, this is an instance where your opponent, remember we were talking about on the previous hand that the player with the more nutty range, the one better equipped to better polarized range is the one who should be driving the action.
Yeah.
Like that's your opponent here. And in this case, I think like aces is still a nutty hand, even though it's not literally the nuts. Like he has, those hands are close enough to the nuts that they can be part of a polarized range for him. He may or may not have more sixes in his range than you do. I would guess that he does, but that's not even the most important part. The most important part is like even when you have sevens, they're not a nutty hand. Sevens are mostly just a bluff catcher here. If the action goes check check, there's a fair number of turns that you can bet, but I don't think you want to start by inflating the pot. You're not going to be in very good shape if a bet is called, essentially. Like if you were betting here with sevens, you'd really just be hoping for a fold.
Yeah. Okay. Because better hands are always going. Okay.
Yeah. Like I think we want to start by checking and most likely calling. There could be a case for a small raise, but I think I would recommend against that. I think you just want to check and call.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me to lead. I don't think that's good.
Okay.
I check and he bets 175. And this player again, anytime you're with him, he makes it possible he could put your stack in play. Like I said, I know he's going to barrel. If I think he's going to barrel the turn quite frequently here. Quickly, his 170. I think his C betting is probably 80% plus, like eights and nines and maybe small pairs. It's the only hands I can think of. Maybe big, maybe aces or kings where he's not going to C bet here. Anyways, that's how I ranged him. And I do.
So you're saying you think he's C betting basically everything?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of hands he wouldn't c-bet.
Like,
Like
he wouldn't do it. Okay. Yeah.
he's c-betting a 6. I mean, he's c-betting pretty much everything other than 8s and 9s. Maybe I'm trying to think of hands.
Yeah, I think he probably should be betting range here. Although I do think the size is a little like it's hard for him to bet range at this size. There's a lot of hands, like Ace King comes to mind. There's a lot of hands that were small pairs, pocket 2s or something. If he's 3-betting those, which he may not be, but there's a lot of hands like those that would be profitable c-bets for say 1/3 pot that I doubt are profitable for what is this, like 7/8 spot. I think it's like he should be more polarized when he's c-betting this big. That's not necessarily good news for you, but like I don't think you're necessarily doing any better against his. Maybe you're doing slightly better against a small c-bet range than his big c-bet range, but not a lot. But I would expect that he might be using a different size with. He might also have a small c-bet size, or I think it would be a mistake for him to be c-betting 90% of his range for this large of a size.
I don't know if you had Ace King here, you would probably bet small, because in my thinking, this guy is always punishing people with sizing, and he's always it's always making you think, geez, how expensive will the turn be?
Yeah, and
like,
I don't know that it's really in his
right
interest to make you think that when he has Ace King or when he has pocket 4s. It's in his incentive to make you. It's in his interest to make you think that when he has a very polarized, right? Like his very strongest hands want to make the pot very big, so he can get more value from them. His very weakest hands want to get folds. Hands in the middle, like Ace King or pocket 4s, are the kinds of hands that don't mind getting calls for small bets. And are not going to be in good shape if a large bet gets called, but also don't benefit terribly much from folds. Like when you do fold, he's not gaining that much from it compared to how much he's losing when you call.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I made a mental note of that too. When I 3-bet with Ace King to c-bet small when I have air, just because.
Really, it's not necessarily true on every board. Just in this particular instance, Ace King is, I think, there's a pretty good chance it's good. It's just not going to be good if a $175 bet is called.
Well, if he's polarized and he's 3-betting with the frequency that I thought, then he's got more weak hands than strong hands here. So does that mean it's a call?
He doesn't necessarily have to, so a polarized range doesn't have to be an unbalanced range. He could just not use the size of every single one of his weak hands. If he has a smaller c-betting range as well, he would want to include some weaker hands in that range. He might also check some weaker hands. Like if he's checking aces and kings, he has some incentive to check some weaker hands as well in order to benefit from like the fold equity that he's buying on later streets. So a polarized range doesn't have to be an unbalanced range. It could, he also gets to do a lot of bluffing here because he has leverage, because he's going to be able to barrel turns and rivers with a polarized range as well. Even knowing that he's weighted towards bluffs doesn't necessarily make calling profitable for you, because again, your equity realization is going to be very poor. Even if you could look at his range and say 7s are good 60% of the time here, that doesn't necessarily make calling profitable, because you don't get to showdown by calling, and you're likely to have to make more negative EV calls on later streets or fold away your equity on later streets. Okay.
So what are you doing with the 7s here? Are you probably folding, or?
I do think you should call with it. I just think it's very low EV. And if you think, which it sounds, so I think if you think he's very good, you should be reluctant to make exploitive assumptions about him. But if your feel is that he's just, essentially that he's not going to have a c-bet once and give up range, like you think he's just, if he has nothing, he's definitely going to take it to the river, then it doesn't make sense for you to have a call once and fold range. Like the reason to have a call once and fold range is to profit from his bet once and give up range. Mm-hmm. So if you don't think he has a bet once and give up range, then there's no reason for you to have a call once and fold later range, especially with a hand that has no chance of improving or very little chance of improving. So I guess if you feel confident saying he's going to go to the river if he has nothing, then you need to make up your mind now whether or not you're going to the river. If you think that you're not comfortable making an assumption about how he's going to play, then it makes sense to have some hands, probably including this one, that are going to call now and likely fold later streets.
Okay. Would you ever check raise here, or is that's the worst of the 3 options?
It's possible that as like a very low frequency thing, you should do it just in case the turn is a 7 so that you're not capped on that turn after check raising. But we're probably not deep enough for that to be a consideration. Against such a large c-bet, I think you probably just don't check raise ever, hardly ever. And when you do check raise, it's extremely polarized, like just trips plus and bluffs, and probably like pocket 7s is, it would be sort of a combination protection / value check raise. And I don't think you're going to be doing much of that against a large c-bet.
Okay. My thinking was pretty much what you just said, that this is already like a decision for a 3 street decision, whether I call here or not. I just thought 7s were too good to fold, so I did call. The turn is a jack of spades.
Okay, does that put 2 spades up on the board? Or? Probably.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, quickly, Andrew, what is your check? Would you rather check call Jack Queen suited with a backdoor flush on that flop than 7s?
I don't think it's an either or decision. I think you probably need both, because sometimes the turn is a queen or a jack and sometimes it isn't. So you want to have some hands, like you want to avoid being in a scenario where he can look at a particular turn card and say, well, that card's obviously bad for Mike.
Gotcha.
So, you want to have some hands that are going to fold when the turn is a queen and some hands that aren't going to fold when the turn is a queen. And some hands are going to fold when the turn is a spade and some that aren't going to fold when the turn is a spade. That's the board coverage concept that we talked about earlier.
Probably from his perspective, he can definitely, for the most part, cap my range, because I don't have that many 6s. I could have 10s, but
could you? Wouldn't you 4-bet 10s?
Well, that's true. I might do that, but like I said, I'm just trying not to play big pots against him, which he's aware of still. I check on the turn, and he bets 450.
You made your decision on the flop, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess we just pissed away 175. We don't call here, right?
Well, I mean, if you think the flop was a bad call, you shouldn't compound it by calling the turn. But if what you said on the flop was, I expected that he's going to barrel off too much, then essentially you exploit that by doing, too much calling, too much bluff catching.
I don't know if this is let's just say this is someone you had a lot of hands with online, and let's just say my stats are somewhat right, where he's 3-betting 20%, c-betting 20%. And a 70%, and then firing another barrel 70% of the time.
Yeah, I mean, then you're back to being probably like indifferent to calling the flop, and also indifferent to calling the turn. I mean, it's not a very sexy answer, but
right.
Yeah, it's just like if he's like, you have a bluff catcher, and a bluff catcher against a polarized range is indifferent between calling and folding.
I do think he's giving up on a fair amount of rivers, but I just decided to fold here. Like I said, there's a lot of weaker players at the table, and it always feels dirty giving this guy my money. He's up 40K on me probably the last 5 years. I don't know, but I actually like folding pre. I think that solves a lot of problems. Folding or 4-betting pre.
Yeah, I mean, this is the main thing I wanted to caution against when you said on the flop, like this was just too strong of a hand to fold. I think it's worth looking forwards a little bit and saying, what do I think is going to happen on later streets? First off, there's a question of, do I want to make an exploitive assumption that if you think this guy's going to barrel off too much, then the right play is just call and close your eyes, call down to the river, except on the very worst runouts. If you think he's not going to barrel enough, then the correct play would be, call the flop and fold most turns. And if you aren't comfortable making an exploitive assumption, then you're going to be indifferent already on the flop. It's not really a matter of, this hand is too strong, because it's not a one street decision. It's a, like the absolute strength of the hand doesn't matter very much, I guess. It's, you're already facing a polarized range on the flop. So the fact that you have 7s is kind of irrelevant, other than sort of like board coverage reasons.
Okay, that makes sense. Can I do one more hand, Andrew? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I got to go in a few minutes too, so I'll try to fly through this one. This is 2-5 too, and I'm going to be 1100 effective with the villain.
2-5 also, or 2-5 with a $2 button straddle?
No, this is 2-5 with no straddle.
Okay, you said 2-5 too. So I was.
Oh, also, yeah. Sorry.
That was a lame joke on my part. Sorry.
Okay. We don't do button straddles at my casino, so I didn't get that.
No, the $2 button straddle, that would be new to me. Okay.
Middle position limps, and the button and the small blind both call. And I have king, queen of hearts in the big blind.
Bombs away.
Going to squeeze with that one, I think, right?
Yeah, I think unless you have some reason to think that the original limper is like extremely strong, I think you just want to make a like. So, what are our stacks?
I know the. I can't remember the button. Let's this hand's from a while ago. I know I'm effective $1,100 with the button. Is like the only thing I wrote down.
I'd probably make it like $40.
They're all casual players, so there's a fair amount of limping.
Yeah, I think you want to make it like 40.
I make it 40.
Oh, great!
There we
Good
go.
job.
I get to feel smart. Only the button calls. The original razor, the original limper, and the small blind both fold.
Okay.
The flop is Jack 10-4, 2 hearts.
Nice.
Wow.
I think it might have actually been the Jack and 10 of hearts. Sorry, this was a while ago. Steve, me and you might have already discussed this hand. I can't remember. I don't think so.
I don't remember this hand.
So I flopped the royal draw. But so I assume we're always betting there. Sorry, Steve?
90 in the pot?
Yes.
Okay.
I wouldn't start with the assumption that you're always betting. I think let's start instead looking at your range. Do you anticipate c-betting this board 100%? Do you think there are going to be hands that you're going to check fold after making this big raise pre-flop, or check call for that matter?
I think I'm c-betting quite a bit here. Other than like top set. I don't know, maybe some gutter balls or something. I don't know, maybe ace queen. Yeah, I don't know what my checking range should look like.
Once we start including ace queen, that's a lot. I mean, you got 16 combinations of ace queen and 16 of ace king. So even if you're not check folding the heart or checking the hearts, which arguably it's possible. Like I wouldn't take it as trivial that you should bet those, but I mean, if you're checking when you have ace king, ace queen without hearts, that's 30 combinations right there. So I do think it makes sense to think about your opponent is going to have some incentive to bet after you check. He's going to have hands that want to protect against ace king, ace queen. He's going to have hands that want to bluff against ace king, ace queen. And you're going to want to have probably some kind of check raising range. This is a hand that definitely has some appeal as a check raise. Like I'm not saying check raising is definitely the right play, but I wouldn't just automatically look and say, oh, it's a good flop, so I bet. Like there are reasons why check raising or even check calling could be good.
Yeah, exploitively, I don't remember the specifics of this player too much. Whether he's whether his bet when check two is high or
your average opponent is probably too passive, which would be an argument for erring on the side of betting.
Okay. I bet 50. Is that the right size? Or are you trying to pump this pot up right away in case we hit our hand? We can somehow get it all in by the river, maybe.
This is 50 into 90.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you probably want to go a little bigger than that. I don't think you have a lot of really depolarized bets here. I think you have either a pretty strong interest in a call or a pretty strong interest in a fold when you're betting, and that's an argument for betting a larger size. Mm-hmm. I guess the closest thing you would have to like a depolarized betting hand here might be like ace 10. But I think in general, you either have a pretty strong hand like top pair plus, or a hand that's a draw of some sort where you're pretty happy to get folds.
Okay.
I guess I don't think you're doing a lot of like straight protection betting here.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
The turn is the 3 of clubs.
So villain calls.
Villain calls.
Villain calls 190 in the pot. Turn is the 3 clubs.
Yes.
Actions on Europe.
And we're like,
Here's the spot that
behind.
I'm sorry, Andrew.
We still have $1,000 behind.
Yes.
Yeah, if we were shallow enough, I would find check raising all in appealing. Check raising could still be okay if you think he's going to bet too much when checked to, but probably he's pretty capped here. So the nice thing about the 3 of clubs is that if he was capped when he just called the flop bet, the 3 didn't uncap him. So this can be an opportunity. Like, you now are in a position to really rep big hands hard, and you get to do a lot of bluffing, both because there's a lot of money behind and because your opponent is capped. There's not a lot he can do about it. So this could even be a good overbetting opportunity, but I think you probably just want to bomb it here, like pot, or probably just pot.
I was thinking like 210 before you started talking, but is that?
Yeah, I think you're in the right neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a bad bet. I feel like I do this a fair amount where I'm chasing a draw out of position, and like I get called on the flop, and then I'll try to kind of set my price on the turn.
Yeah, I don't think you want to think of it as setting a price. I think you want to think of it as you're trying to get a fold, really. Your objective here is not see the river and hope to improve. That's like the backup plan. What you really want, like the best case scenario for you, is just getting a fold right now.
Okay. That makes sense. I bet 90, and the villain here, maybe this villain's better than we thought, because he wasn't capped. I don't know, but he raises to 260.
I mean, you have the best possible bluffing hand. So the only reason not to shove here, I think, would be if you, which is, this by the way is very plausible. But the reason not to shove here would be that if you think he just always has it when he calls flop and raises turn, which many people do. But if you think that he is going to sometimes fold to a shove, this is like the perfect semi-bluffing hand.
And if he's got 2 pair plus here mostly, then it's just a call.
Yeah.
If that's our read.
I mean, there's even a chance it's a fold depending on what, I don't think you're getting the right price, the right immediate price to draw to your outs. So you have to be banking on either profitable bluffing opportunities on the river or profitable value betting opportunities on the river, which you may well have, but I guess I wouldn't take it as trivial that if he literally always has it here, I don't know that calling is trivial.
Again, this would be like a player dependent. If I don't think I'm getting paid by when my flush hits, then is it definitely a fold because we're just not?
I don't know. I mean, you might still have implied odds, say, on an ace river, if he's going to expect you to have a flush draw, or even more so on a 9 river, if you think it's like hero call because it looks like a busted flush draw or something. The point I want to make is just that it is going to be dependent, I think, on you over-realizing your equity on the river. I don't think you have the right immediate equity to call given the price that you're getting. I could be wrong about that. I'm not doing the math in my head, but I think there's a decent chance to that if you just assumed that you had to go to showdown with no further betting and you just counted your outs relative to your pot odds, you very well may not have the right price to call. So in order to make the call profitable, you'd have to be anticipating outperforming your equity in some way on the river, which would mean either bluffing sometimes when you missed or value betting sometimes, successfully value betting when you hit.
It looks like 170 to win a pot of 610. So that's not good enough. I would need a little better odds there if we're just talking about equity in the pot. I do call though. I guess the worst. I got to say, shoving at the time I don't think occurred to me, but like I said, this was my read that he's just very strong, but it still might not be a horrible play. The river is the 7 of diamonds.
Yeah, I think you just have to check fold. I don't think you can really represent anything.
Yes, that's what I did. I checked and he bet 400 and I folded. So at least one street I played it well.
The flop, you nailed it on that size thing. I think most people don't raise enough in this situation. Most people feel like 40 is like too much for some reason for that they can't really articulate. Whereas in fact, like I'm perfectly happy if everyone just folds. And if they do call, I still expect to be ahead of their calling ranges. So I don't think 40 is an unreasonable size at all.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Andrew.
Pleasure talking to you guys.
Yeah, this was cool. If you guys want to check out Andrew's podcast, it's the Thinking Poker podcast. You're up to almost 300 episodes, right?
Yeah, we just released 282 on Monday.
282, yeah. It had a lot of interesting guests on there. Andy Block, Vanessa Selps, Carlos is on there quite a bit, Alexander Fitzgerald. You have almost 300 to choose from, so definitely check it out. I got started. You guys were the first podcast that I ever listened to, ever. And then right after that, it was TPE. So it's very cool. And if you guys want to get coaching from you, Andrew, where could they go?
Thinkingpoker.net, and there's a tab on there called coaching that has some additional information, or if people want to just email me, andrew@thinkingpoker.net, and we can correspond that way as well.
Okay, awesome. Right on. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. Thank you, Mikey. And thank you for tuning in. Here is your weekly motivational speech.
If you work your ass off, you're totally focused, you're trying to serve something larger than yourself, and you really are executing what works, you need a little grace. You might want to call it luck if you prefer, God, the universe, but it's there. And we can all achieve. But I think the more important skill, if you ask me, is to have an extraordinary life is the art of fulfillment. And it's an art. It's not a science. Because there's a science to making money. I don't care who you are. If you do certain things, you're going to have too much financial stress. You do other things, you're going to have an abundance. There's a science. There's a science to your body. Everyone here is biochemically different genome, but there's certain fundamental patterns that if you and I follow them, you're going to have tons of energy, you're going to feel good. If you break them, you're going to pay the price and have low energy or disease. But fulfillment is an art. What's going to fulfill you is different than the other person next to you. You're not going to learn that from anybody else. And you got to find it, because success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure.